Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Nando González. Soy consultor UX y voy a presentar a Jeff Gothelf y su nuevo libro Lean UX. Okay. Jeff is an interaction designer, blogger, speaker. He's the managing director of the NEO office in New York. He's one of the leading voices on Agile UX and the writer of Lean UX. So, hi Jeff, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Okay, so let's start right away, okay?
Sure.
I'm going to ask you some questions, but we also have here questions from the people who are following us. So let's
Sure.
begin. Let's begin with my questions. So Jeff, tell me, what's your book Lean UX all about?
I won't tell you how it ends. It has a special ending. No.
Okay.
It's interesting. So we wrote the book as a guide for designers by designers how to do great user experience design in an increasingly agile world. But what happened during the writing of the book and since we wrote the book has been really interesting. The concepts in the book translate far beyond design, certainly far beyond user experience design, and really focus on building better team interactions, building more customer centricity into our product development processes, and really focusing teams on making evidence-based decisions. And so the tactics in the book, even though they're written, again, kind of from the point of view of a designer to another designer, they've been adopted by a much broader audience than just design. And that was always our goal, was to really attract a cross-functional audience. And so you've got, obviously designers reading the book, product managers, engineers, managers in general reading the book, content strategists, because it's really helping them figure out how to build agile teams that design great products in short iterative cycles in this world, really focusing on the things that are most important to moving those products forward and doing less of the things that maybe we've done in the past that didn't help design move forward as quickly as it needs to move today.
Okay, so tell us, what are the principles of Lean UX?
The principles are based around a realization that the world of software development has changed fundamentally, especially in the last 5 years. The ideas behind continuous deployment have reshaped the way that we can engage with our audience. And because of that, you have to rethink the way that we develop and design software products. One of the main ways, one of the big principles, is that we prioritize learning over delivery. The first thing we want to know is whether or not something is worth pursuing and to what extent before we actually decide to ship it, before we decide to deliver it. And so we focus on learning first, continuous learning, short, iterative experiments, MVPs, customer conversations, in an effort to understand whether we should be pursuing a particular path, not just a feature, but also an implementation model, a design, a workflow. And then if we should, then let's figure out how to optimize it and push that forward. And so that's one of the main principles. Another principle is to focus on evidence-based decision-making. We want to make sure that the decisions that we make are objective and based on the things that we learn coming out of our learning activities, coming out of the experiments and the MVPs. We want to make decisions based on fact, as much fact as we can gather in the time that we have to gather it, as opposed to a series of assumptions and subjective points of view that are largely based on opinion. Another principle that helps us achieve that is cross-functional collaboration. There's this sense that to get this to work well, you have to open up the design process, the development process, the product management process, and let everybody participate in that process to the best of their abilities. And so let's not close off those processes to other input. And I think most importantly, the thing that we have to remember is the idea of shared understanding. And what I mean by that is the ability for designers, engineers, product managers, marketers to understand what everybody else is doing and why they're doing it. And what that does is it allows us to make a much more informed decision as designers, as product managers, as engineers on how to react to those. So for example, if we see a design and we've never seen it before and it has something red on it, we could say, I don't like red. But we don't, and we do that a lot. I think that happens a lot, but we don't pause to understand why that red component is in the design. And I think with shared understanding, you get that a lot faster than waiting for the designer to finish it and then ship a prototype or a mock-up or a spec document that describes that. And the same holds true for any functionality or engineering or the way something works. So the more we work together, the more we talk to customers, the more we understand who we're solving a problem for, what problem we're solving, what success looks like, and why we've made the decisions that we've made. And that really helps a team move a lot faster.
I see. We have a question from Marlon Jose Lopez. He asks, does it mean that we should not create more deliverables?
It's a good question, and I feel I certainly feel partially responsible for this conversation. I wrote an article about 4 years ago. Yes, 4 years ago now. Wow, 4 years ago that called "Getting Out of the Deliverables Business." And look, the reason I wrote that article is because having worked as an interaction designer for 11, 12 years at that point, I felt like we were being reduced to simply writing specifications. And I wanted to get out of that line of work. I didn't want to be a spec writer. I wanted to be a designer. And so that doesn't mean that we don't create deliverables. What it does mean is that we create the deliverables that we need, and only those that we need, to move the conversation forward. Now, if the only conversation we're having is based in deliverables, we're never going to get out of that business. And so coupling a real-time interpersonal conversation with other disciplines, with designers, engineers, and product managers, allows us to move forward faster and then document just the things that we need to document to move to the next step. So I don't want to say that you never have to create a deliverable again, because that's not true. You have to create the deliverable, the minimum amount of artifacts to move the conversation forward. Sometimes that artifact is, it's a Post-it note. Sometimes it's a prototype. Sometimes it's a mock-up. Sometimes it's the working feature. It really depends on where you're going. But only do what you need to do to move the conversation forward to the next step.
Okay. Marlon wants to know the advantages related to communication between people and teams.
So the key in all of this is building a great communication process. This is really what it's about, honestly, is building a great communication process with your colleagues so that you reduce the risk of spending time working on the wrong things. I mean, that's what we're doing here, right? We want to make sure we don't build or we don't design the wrong products, the wrong features. All of us live in resource-constrained environments. And at some point, those resources, the time, money, the people, are going to run out. And so let's make sure that we spend that time, that money, and those people's efforts on ideas that stand the greatest chance of success. Now, the best way to do that is to build a continuous learning process based on customer conversation, and to include everyone in that conversation. I think one of the worst things that I did for many years was to outsource my research. I would outsource my research to researchers or to labs or to ethnographers. And it's not to say that there's no value in those roles or in those jobs, but now I want to be a part of that conversation. I want to be a part of that effort. I want to be there firsthand talking to the customers, and everybody else on the team should be there as well to some extent. And so all of those facts facilitate a much more real-time conversation. And that gets you to a direction as a team faster, and it focuses the team faster. And so what you're combining is real-time communication, customer conversations, and evidence to make decisions about what to do next.
I see. And tell me, Jeff, how UX and Agile methodologies match together?
Well, it's interesting. If you had asked me this question 7-8 years ago, the answer would have been, I don't know. And I think nobody really knew back then. What I found, and I think the reason for that is that people didn't want to give up people got very scared that by changing the way that we did our jobs as designers, we would give up some uniqueness that we bring to the process, and that we would be less valuable to our teams. And I think that's why there was so much challenge initially integrating design and Agile. In reality, the two processes should be very compatible. Agile is an iterative development process, and design is an iterative process as well. It's we try something, we see how it works, and then we refine it, and then we try it, and we do it again. So the two processes should mesh well together. Yes. But it's been a really difficult climb to get to where we are today. The way things work well together today is by opening up those conversations and saying, I'm the designer, but I don't have all the answers. And you as an engineer can come into that conversation and tell me your point of view on how this thing should work and how it should look. And let's get the customer's point of view. And then let's work together to craft a test, something we can put in front of customers very quickly to see if that's what we should work on.
I see.
And then the feedback that comes from that test informs the conversation further. And that's the iterative. So when you start off working on something, the level of certainty that you have about that idea dictates the level of fidelity of your test. So if you have very little certainty that this is the right thing to work on, then your test should be very lightweight. As you gain more certainty in your ideas, the fidelity of your experiment gets higher. And so we go from a wireframe to a mock-up to a prototype to a living data, a living data prototype to an actual feature. And we refine our thinking and our presentation and our design iteratively. And that works really well in an Agile process if, and it's a big if, and it's not common yet, if we change our definition of success. Most of the companies that I work with today define success as shipping features. And if that's the case, then you're not doing iterative Agile. You're doing incremental Agile. You're just getting features out the door. You have to change your definition of success for this iterative model to work. And in that case, your definition of success becomes outcomes. Changing customer behavior and measuring that change. that gives you an objective definition of success. So that, for example, traditional definition of success is launch a new sign-in page. Did you ship the new sign-in page? Yes, we did. Okay. An outcome-based definition of success is increase the number of successful sign-ins. Maybe a new sign-in page does that. Maybe a giant red blinking sign-in button does that. Maybe fingerprint authentication does that. Maybe no authentication does that, right? There are 1,000 ways to solve that. Let's give the team the problem to solve and define success when they increase successful sign-ins by a certain amount. And that's the key. That's when a company turns that corner, integrating design, agile, and UX becomes a lot easier, because the measure of success is not getting a feature out the door, it's changing customer behavior.
I see. Okay. What's the role of design thinking in Lean UX?
Design thinking is really, it's one of the core ideas behind it, right? So there's three components as defined by IDEO. There are three components to design thinking that sit at the heart of the beginning of the Lean UX process. The first is empathy. It's understanding the customer, the problem the customer is having, and the context in which that problem is occurring. And again, that's not just for designers to do, it's for the team to understand. The next is creativity in the generation of solutions. Again, a team activity, once we have empathy for the problem and the customer, a team activity or a set of activities to generate a lot of ideas about how to solve this particular business problem. And lastly, a rationality to determine which ideas actually work. And that's really the hard part. I think it's generally easy to observe customers, to talk to customers, to understand their world. I mean, you get better at it. You're not good at it at first, but you get better at it. I think that's relatively easy. I think it's fun and relatively easy to generate a lot of creative solutions to those problems. Where I think it becomes really difficult is to be truly honest with your team, with your stakeholders, with your customers, about which solutions actually solve a problem, actually solve a real problem. And then once you do that, that's when you can kind of focus on the things that really work, as opposed to the things that don't actually work. And that's key. And that's a very difficult, because we love our ideas, right? We're hopelessly optimistic that our ideas are going to be the best ideas. And it's not fun to hear that your idea is not good or not going to work. And so that's the hard part.
Okay. See, your method is related to the Lean Startup method. But what are the differences between Lean UX and Lean Startup?
I don't think there's a difference necessarily. I think what we've done is we've built upon the Lean Startup framework, and we've really injected design and user centricity into the process. I think we've, one of the things that's continually missing from the Lean Startup conversation, at least at the beginning, it's much more prevalent there now, but I think what was missing at the beginning was, how does design play a role in this? Where is the UX? Where is the customer? And I think what we've done is we've taken the model and we've made it tactical. Here's how design fits. Here's how UX fits. Here are the tools and the techniques that we can build together to actually structure a process that not only solves the problem, but solves it in an elegant, in an efficient, in a sophisticated way.
Okay. How do you do to implement the Lean UX methodology in a company used to work with traditional methodologies? How do you do that?
It's not easy. My advice there is to start small. First of all, don't try to change the whole company immediately. see if you can create a pilot team, a team that will try this out in the company. And what that pilot team will learn is two things. The first thing they'll learn is how to do lean UX.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing they'll learn is how to do lean UX within the context of that company, because it's different. Every company is different. Your
Mm-hmm.
industry is different. The company politics are different. Your success criteria is different. Your users are different. And so pilot teams work really well. Maybe a designer, an engineer, and a product manager. And give them a small problem to solve. Something low risk, maybe even internal, that they can try, and then report back to the organization about what works well and what doesn't work well. But the key to remember here, and this I've seen many people fail when they've tried to do this, is transparency. If you take that pilot team, let's say it's a 3-person team, and you stick them in a corner somewhere or in a room where nobody can see what they're doing, and then at the end of a week or a month, they emerge and just say, ta-da, here's what we did. No one's going to buy it. And people will reject it because it'll just seem like stuff they manufactured and they don't know where it came from. And people are scared of change. And so in this situation, the pilot team has to be as transparent as possible. They have to work out in the open. They have to put their stuff up on the walls. They have to report back to the organization regularly. Mm-hmm. They have to put their metrics, their success criteria, on screens or on the walls in printouts every day so the company can see how well they're doing. And they have to be very, very public about all of this so that when they do get that aha moment, or I'm sorry, the ta-da moment, then people understand where it came from. And they can see the value not just in the result, but in the process that it took to get there. So transparency is really the key.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Marlon is wondering what happens with large companies. Is Lean UX incompatible with well-established corporations? What do you think?
It is. I think well-established corporations are actually in a better place than most startups. The reason for that is that established corporations have a significant amount of data. They have usage data, they have customer data, they have market data, competitive data, and all of that information places them in several steps ahead of a startup entering that space.
Yes.
A startup has to learn all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
An existing company has all that information there, and so their assumptions, their guesses, can be more educated, better targeted guesses. So I think it works really well. Now, the challenge is obviously changing the organization, changing the culture, and I think most importantly is focusing the success criteria on outcomes. That's the key, and it's really hard because, again, it's really easy to measure when you are managing to features, to output. Mm-hmm. It's a binary thing, right? Did you make the phone? Yeah, we made the phone. There it is, right? It's you either did or you didn't. So that's easy to measure. But did you increase conversion rates? Did you increase successful sign-in rates by 55%? Well, we increased them, but we only increased it by 27%. Mm-hmm. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. Context determines that, but it's much more difficult. It's squishy. It's not clear and clean.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we are running out of time, so let's go directly to the last questions. Okay. Jeff, what do you think are the challenges of UX for the next years?
I think there's a couple of really interesting challenges coming up. First of all, content everywhere. How many different screen sizes are we trying to design for today? forget that, right? I mean, with wearables and devices coming out every day, we have to realize that our experiences are going to live in a variety of contexts that we can't predict. How
Yeah.
do we build our applications, our content, and our workflow to take advantage of all of these new screens, sizes, shapes, contexts? I think that's a big thing to consider. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out and how it works. Design languages are going to be really big. I think Google's material design is a really interesting step forward in that direction, right? How do we build a language that works on a screen, on a big, a big cinema display, on a
Yeah.
phone, on a watch, on a purse, etc. So I think that's one. And then the other thing that's really big is service design. How do we carry the customer experience from physical location to device to desktop to phone to packaging to everything, customer service, right? I think service design is really going to set apart the winners in the future. And we have to be thinking about that completely. We can't just think that our application, that our experience lives on a phone anymore. It's much broader than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What advice would you give to a UX newcomer?
Um, Advice to UX newcomer, I would say, um, I mean, the most important thing is to always be curious, to build continuous learning into your process and into the way that you do work. So never always have a little bit of skepticism in your
Uh,
process. Never rely on something always working again and again and again, because things are continually changing. And so I would say always be a little bit skeptical.
mhm. Okay. And we have a last question from Marta Jimenez.
Okay.
She asks, where did you get the inspiration to write the book?
It's interesting. I did. I had no intention of writing the book. I had no intention of writing any book. It seemed like a mountain to climb that I could never climb. Um, I was inspired when I was figuring things out at the ladders, when I was working at the ladders, when I was figuring out how to put Agile and UX together. We started to come across some things that I thought would help some people. So I started blogging about it, and I started speaking at conferences. And there was a lot of interest in the material, and so I kept writing and I kept speaking. And then I was approached by book publishers to write a book about the topic. And so at that point, sure, give it a shot and see how it goes. But I never set out to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
I just, found the subject fascinating. We figured out some things that other people didn't seem to figure out at the time, and there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of interest. So that's how the book deal came.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Jeff, but we don't have more time.
That's okay.
So I just have to thank you for the interview and for being here with us. And 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 we hope you have luck with your new book.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
very
much.
much. And I really appreciate you guys doing this, and thank you for translating the book. And one thing, if you didn't get your question asked, I put my email address in the chat window, and I'm happy
Okay.
to hear from you. Please email me with any questions. I'm happy to help.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.